I knew the air in the building had changed the day he walked in. The new CEO, Marcus Sloan, all smug jawline and Harvard haircut, didn't even bother shaking hands when he first stepped onto our floor. He just swept his gaze over everyone like he was calculating which heads to cut first. I'd been through acquisitions, mergers, recessions, and two different economic downturns without flinching. But this one made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way he glanced at the framed article about our product launch. My product launch, like he was already figuring out how to stamp his name on it. I'd been here for 10 years, ever since I sold my small but scrappy startup to this company. It had been a handshake and a contract, both equally important. My software, my patents, my designs, folded into their bigger machine with the promise of creative freedom and financial security. In return, I delivered them a product line that went from saving their skin in year one to generating $80 million annually. Not in some abstract spreadsheet sense, either. I'd walked the trade show floors, sat through the client demos, pulled caffeine-fueled nights fixing bugs no one else could even understand. My fingerprints were on every inch of the thing. Now Marcus was here, all about streamlining operations and maximizing shareholder value, which, in CEO speak, meant someone was about to get the axe. The rumor mill churned fast, mid-level managers whispering about budgets being rebalanced, HR suddenly scheduling mysterious performance reviews. I smiled through it all, kept my meetings tight, and did what I'd always done, made sure our product line kept humming. But I also started paying attention, because I've learned that when someone like Marcus arrives, they come with a guillotine in their carry-on. Oh, and quick sidebar, because I can see you're already leaning in. 97% of you listening to this kind of story never hit that little subscribe button. It's free, it keeps more stories like this coming, and honestly, it makes our whole team grin like idiots every time the number ticks up. So if you like where this is going, tap it. Now, back to me watching Marcus circle like a shark. The first week, he didn't speak to me directly. The second week, he made it a point to drop by my office during lunch, as if checking to see if I'd left my laptop unlocked. By the third week, he'd pulled me into two vision alignment meetings where I listened to him suggest changes I'd already implemented years ago, like a guy proudly reinventing the wheel but square this time. Still, I played along. That's what you do when someone with a god complex walks in. You nod, you sip your coffee, you let them think they're making history. But inside, I was doing math. Not revenue projections or product roadmaps, just counting the days since I'd last opened the dusty binder in my home office, the one that still smelled faintly of printer ink and stale coffee from the day it was signed. The acquisition contract had been my armor back then. I'd fought for every line, every clause, every word. My lawyer had warned me the company would try to get me to soften the terms, but I'd stood my ground. Back then, I'd told myself it was just about protecting my creative work. Now, 10 years later, I had the uneasy sense that maybe it was about to protect a lot more than that. The funny thing is, Marcus thought he was being subtle. He'd reference cost inefficiencies in the product team. He'd praise the engineering group for operating independently from legacy leadership. Legacy, that's what he called me. Never mind that my so-called legacy accounted for the majority of their yearly revenue. I recognized the pattern, strip credit, isolate influence, then remove the obstacle. It's corporate Darwinism, but with PowerPoint slides. I'd seen people crumble under that kind of pressure, panicked resumes flying out at midnight, half-finished projects abandoned in their inboxes. Not me. I wasn't about to run scared from a man who still thought putting his name on a memo was leadership. If anything, his little maneuvering act just sharpened my focus. Every time he hinted about future restructuring, I smiled and thought about that binder at home. I didn't know when I'd need it, but I knew exactly where it was. The atmosphere on our floor grew taut. People avoided eye contact in the hallways. Lunch tables got quieter. Even the hum of the servers in the lab seemed heavier, like the whole building was holding its breath. I kept doing my job, kept delivering results so clean they could have been framed. All the while, I kept replaying a single thought in my head. Marcus doesn't know the rules of the game he just started. By the time the cut came, I was ready. Or at least, I thought I was. What I didn't know yet was that he'd try to make it personal. That was his mistake. And that's the thing about men like Marcus, they always think they're the hunter, until they step into a trap that's been waiting for them for 10 years. It happened on a Thursday, because of course it did. Thursdays are the sweet spot for corporate executions, close enough to the weekend that people can process the gossip over drinks, but far enough from Monday that no one storms into HR demanding answers. I just wrapped up a morning client call when Marcus's assistant appeared in my doorway, face polite but tight. He'd like to see you. Now. The conference room he'd chosen wasn't one of the big glass fishbowls where everyone could see the slaughter. No, this was a smaller, windowless room down by the legal department. It smelled faintly of toner and stale carpet cleaner. Marcus was already sitting at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He looked like he'd been practicing in a mirror. Sit, he said like he was training a dog. I took my time pulling out the chair, placing my notepad down, clicking my pen. No rush. If he was going to pull the trigger, he could at least work for the moment. Then he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Your ideas and the 80 million in revenue they generated are ours now. He let that hang in the air for a second, watching for a reaction. I didn't give him one, not even a raised eyebrow. I just wrote down the words ours now in my notepad, circled them once, and met his gaze. That's when he leaned back, put on his best nothing personal face, and said the actual words. We're terminating your position, effective immediately. Two security guards appeared like they'd been hiding in the walls. One of them was the same guy who'd waved me in every morning for a decade. He couldn't meet my eyes. Marcus gestured toward the door. They'll escort you to collect your belongings. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer, sliding my pen into my bag. Of course, I said, no protest, no negotiation. Just calm compliance, the kind that makes a man like him second guess whether he's actually one. The walk back to my office was a silent parade. Coworkers peeked up from monitors, eyes flicking between me and the guards. Some tried to smile. Others just stared at their keyboards like if they didn't look, it wasn't happening. I could feel the questions hanging in the air. What happened? Why her? No one dared to ask out loud. I moved through the motions easily, photos off the desk, USB drive into my bag, a couple of old notebooks I didn't even need but took anyway because they were mine. The guard stood by the door, stiff and uncomfortable. I handed over my badge without being asked. On the way to the elevator, I caught my reflection in the dark glass wall of the lobby. I was smiling, not a warm smile, not a fake thank you for the opportunity smile, just a faint, steady curve of the lips that said you have no idea what you've just done. Marcus thought this was the end of my story here. He thought firing me stripped me of everything I'd built, that it would erase my name from the foundation of this company. What he didn't know, and what I was already turning over in my mind, was that with one signature on that dusty contract 10 years ago, I'd planted a seed that was about to crack his whole empire wide open. By the time the elevator doors closed, my cold fury had already shifted into something far more dangerous. Focus. The first thing I did when I got home wasn't pour a drink or call a friend, it was walk straight past the kitchen, down the hall, and into my old home office. The room had barely changed in a decade. The same bookcase lined with outdated tech manuals, the same dent in the carpet where my desk chair used to sit, the same smell of dust and paper and faint printer ink. This was where I'd run my original startup before the acquisition, where I'd fought through 12-hour days and 100-hour weeks to get that first prototype working. Where, one late night with my lawyer, I'd signed the contract that handed my work to a bigger company, for a price but on my terms. In the far corner of the bookcase sat a thick black binder, its spine bowed from overstuffed page protectors. I pulled it down, the weight of it familiar in my hands, and laid it on the desk. A faint puff of dust rose into the air when I opened it. Page after page of dense legal text stared back at me, each clause and subsection marked with my old yellow highlighter. This was my insurance policy, the thing I'd hoped I'd never have to use but had always known could save me if the company turned on me. I flipped through, fingers skimming over notes in the margins, half in my handwriting, half in my lawyer's. There were the standard acquisition terms: purchase price, stock transfer schedules, non-compete restrictions. Then the creative control clauses I'd fought for tooth and nail. And then there it was. A single, short sentence tucked into a section so dull no one without a reason would bother reading it. In the event of termination without cause, all rights, titles, and interests in the acquired intellectual property shall revert in full to the seller, upon payment of the sum of $1.00. One sentence. 27 words, the quietest landmine in corporate history. I sat back in my chair and let the meaning settle in. Marcus had fired me without cause. No warnings, no write-ups, no claims of misconduct or underperformance, just a smug smile and a whispered insult. He thought it was clean and decisive. Instead, he triggered the very clause designed to pull the rug out from under anyone foolish enough to think they could own me. I traced the words with my finger, remembering the day my lawyer insisted we slip it in. At the time, I'd thought it was just about protecting my future creative projects. He'd said, "You never know who'll be in charge in 10 years. And trust me, no one reads every line." Marcus hadn't. I'd bet my life on it. The calculation began in my head immediately: what it would take to send formal notice, how long the legal process would run, how fast they'd realize their entire $80 million a year product line was legally about to walk out the door with me. The thought didn't make me giddy. It didn't make me nervous either. It just focused me, the way a sniper might feel lining up a shot they've been preparing for years. He thought he'd stripped me of power today. All he'd done was hand me the detonator. I didn't wait until morning. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped the name I'd saved years ago under in case of war. "Please tell me this isn't you calling from county lockup," my lawyer, David Lasker, said by way of hello. His voice was half amusement, half suspicion. "You knew I didn't call for small things." "Better," I said. "Marcus Sloan just fired me, without cause." There was a pause, then a slow inhale. "You're kidding. I have the binder open in front of me." "You mean the binder, the very one?" Another pause, this time followed by a low whistle. You've got to be, oh, this is beautiful. You kept that clause intact all these years. I told you I would. I could hear the smile in his voice now. All right. We're not wasting a second. Grab a pen. Because here's what we're going to do. 20 minutes later, we were on a shared video call, both of us staring at the scanned page from my acquisition contract. He read the clause aloud like it was a fine piece of poetry, savoring each word. Then he pulled up a draft letter template he must have had tucked away for exactly this scenario. This is going to be simple, he said. We cite the clause verbatim, declare the reversion of all acquired IP effective immediately, and we send them a check for $. I finished. David grinned. Exactly. A real physical check. None of this electronic transfer nonsense. They'll have to hold it in their hands while realizing what they've done. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my old checkbook, the one I barely used anymore. I wrote it out slowly in neat blue ink. Pay to the order of company name, $1.00/100. Memo line, IP reversion per acquisition contract. The pen scratched faintly against the paper, each stroke of ink feeling like a blade. Now here's the fun part, David said. We're skipping the lawyers in the middle. This doesn't go to legal first, or HR, or even operations. We send this certified, signature required, directly to the CEO and every member of the board. The moment they open it, it's legally binding. The countdown starts before their in-house counsel can even try to spin it. I imagine Marcus sitting at his glossy conference table, opening that letter, dollar check fluttering into his lap, scanning the clause with dawning horror. I pictured the board members, some of whom had been around since my acquisition, reading it and realizing exactly what had just slipped through their fingers. David was already typing furiously. Certified mail with tracking. We'll have proof of receipt. You're going to sit back and let them stew? The sense of control that settled over me in that moment was like stepping into warm sunlight after weeks in the cold. This wasn't rage anymore. This was precision. Every detail lined up, every move deliberate. Marcus had set the board in motion, but I had the checkmate in my pocket, and the envelope was already being sealed. Marcus got the letter on a Tuesday morning, just before his weekly leadership sync. David had set the delivery to land at 9 a.m. sharp, knowing that's when Marcus would be surrounded by his inner circle and in just the right mood to perform for them. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but I can picture it perfectly. Marcus tearing open the thick, cream-colored envelope, skimming the first lines with that little smirk of his. Maybe he even read the $1 check memo out loud for a laugh. IP reversion per acquisition contract. Probably thought it was some kind of joke. Then, somewhere around the third sentence where the clause was cited in full, his smile tightened. I imagine he tried to cover it, maybe even chuckled and tossed it toward his general counsel. But the thing about seasoned corporate lawyers is that they don't do casual. They read. Slowly. And when they're done, they don't laugh. From what one of my still loyal contacts told me, the GC's face went flat after about 30 seconds of reading. She looked up at Marcus and said, "We need to verify this immediately," which is lawyer speak for oh God. By noon, the whispers had already started to leak beyond the executive floor. Legal had confirmed the clause was enforceable, not just in theory, but in the most literal, ironclad way possible. Worse for them, the deadline to contest it, the small window buried in the contract, had expired years ago. It was mine, all of it, the moment they fired me without cause. No appeals, no loopholes, just gone. Internal emails started flying so fast that its monitoring system flagged a suspicious spike in activity. The product managers were the first to panic, because they knew what the loss really meant. Without those products, 70% of the company's revenue stream didn't just shrink, it evaporated. We weren't talking about trimming a budget line here. We were talking about ripping out the spine of the company. By early afternoon, my phone was lighting up with messages from friends inside. Short, frantic bursts. WTF did you do? Marcus looks like he's been shot. Half the engineers just got pulled into a priority meeting, nobody's talking. Product roadmap meeting canceled. Canceled. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, instead. I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open, watching the industry news ticker. Nothing had broken publicly yet, but the first signs were there. Supply chain vendors pinging me on LinkedIn to check in, a few competitors suddenly viewing my profile, the subtle ripples before a wave crashes. There's a special kind of satisfaction in watching cracks form exactly where you knew they would. Detached, clinical, almost quiet, like an engineer watching a stress test in slow motion. Marcus had made his move thinking he was in control. All he'd done was lean on the weakest part of his own foundation, and now I could hear it groaning under the weight. And the best part? I hadn't even called them yet. The first call came less than 24 hours after Marcus opened that envelope. Unknown number, but the area code told me it was from their headquarters. I let it ring out. Then came the second, and the third, then the first email. We'd like to discuss the recent correspondence you sent to our executive team, polite, measured, pretending nothing was on fire. I didn't answer that either. By day 2, the tone had shifted. The emails got shorter, more urgent. The subject lines lost their polish. Need to talk, urgent. Please call me back. This is escalating fast. My phone buzzed every couple of hours with new missed calls, each from a different extension. I let them all pile up, unread and unanswered, like a stack of unpaid bills they couldn't throw away. I wasn't being petty. I was being patient. Letting fear breathe is sometimes more effective than pushing it. Right now, they were still trying to convince themselves this could be handled quietly, that I might be reasonable if they could just get me on the line. The longer I stayed silent, the more they'd realize that reasonable wasn't on the table. By midweek, first industry ripples began to hit. A friend in a supplier company texted me, "Hey, did you pull your IP from them? Their dev team just froze half the flagship product builds." Another messaged, "Marcus canceled a keynote for next month, says they're restructuring." Then the whispers started showing up on public forums. Someone posted on an industry board, "Why is company name S flagship platform offline and staging? Rumor is a licensing issue." The thread exploded. Some guessed it was a security breach. Others claimed it was a planned pivot. But the ones who knew how these things worked, they were putting the pieces together. And competitors? They can smell blood like sharks. My LinkedIn was suddenly full of connection requests from rival executives and recruiters. A few were bold enough to send messages. "If you're available to talk about transitions, I think we could help each other." They didn't have the full picture yet, but they knew enough. Something valuable had slipped out of Marcus's grasp, and it was in play. Meanwhile, I did my grocery shopping. I walked the dog. I reorganized the files on my desktop. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, I was tracking every tick of their unraveling, like a conductor letting the orchestra build before the crash of the cymbals. The pressure was building exactly how I wanted, internally from their own panic, externally from the market's curiosity. Every hour I stayed quiet. The air around Marcus got thinner. I could almost hear it in my head, the shuffling footsteps in the executive hallways, the murmured conversations behind closed doors, the desperate what the hell do we do meetings stacking up on calendars. I wasn't going to break the silence until it hurt them to stay in it, and we weren't quite there yet, not until the fear turned into full-on desperation. That's when I'd answer. It was late afternoon on a Friday when my phone finally lit up with his name. Not private number, not his assistant, Marcus Sloan himself. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, letting it ring long enough to make him sweat. Then I swiped to answer, slow and deliberate. "Hello, Marcus." There was a pause on the other end, like he hadn't expected me to pick up. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of that boardroom bravado. "We need to talk." "I assume that's why you've been calling," I said, keeping my tone even, almost bored. Another pause. Then carefully, "Look, I think we can come to an arrangement here. There's money on the table if we can resolve this quietly." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "You think this is about a payout? It doesn't have to be ugly," he said quickly, the words spilling a little faster now. "We both know the value of what's at stake. I'm willing to authorize." Stop, I cut in. "You fired me without cause. You triggered a clause you didn't even bother to read. As of the moment that letter hit your desk, the terms were fulfilled. The rights are mine. There's nothing to negotiate." Silence. A long, weighted kind of silence, the kind where you can practically hear someone's heartbeat in their throat. Finally, he tried again. "There's still room to," "No," I said, flat and final. "There isn't." For a second, I thought he might explode, but instead his voice went even quieter, tight with the kind of control people use when they're trying not to break. "You're making a mistake." I let that hang in the air for just a beat. "Marcus, the only mistake here was yours, and now you get to live with it." There was the faint sound of an exhale, more like a hiss, then the line went dead. He'd hung up without a goodbye. I sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand, staring out the window at the fading light. The quiet triumph settling over me wasn't the giddy kind. It was colder than that, sharper. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about reclaiming something that was always mine. And I still hadn't played my final move. That was coming. Soon. And when it landed, Marcus wouldn't just realize I wasn't bluffing. He'd understand that I'd been in control from the moment he whispered those words in that conference room. The following week, I sat in a sleek conference room 3 cities away from Marcus's office, shaking hands with the CEO of their fiercest competitor. Where Marcus had always exuded smugness, this man radiated calculation, a predator who didn't waste energy posturing because he knew exactly when to strike. The licensing agreement lay between us, thick and precise. Every page had been combed over by my lawyer, every term locked down to the decimal. Not just the rights to produce and sell the product line, but the full marketing package, public, loud, unavoidable. This wasn't going to be some quiet transaction whispered about in industry circles. This was going to be a flag planted squarely in the middle of Marcus's battlefield. I signed the final page, slid the pen across the table, and felt the weight shift. It was done. My former company's crown jewel was now flying under someone else's banner, and I was the one who'd handed it over. The licensing fees alone would keep me comfortable for years. But the real payoff wasn't the money, it was the message. 2 days later, the competitor went public with it. Their press release wasn't subtle. "We are thrilled to announce our acquisition of exclusive rights to the industry's top-performing product line, previously developed under company name. This strategic partnership will allow us to expand our market dominance and deliver unmatched value to our clients worldwide. Even included a quote from me about looking forward to future innovations in an environment that values creativity and integrity. I didn't have to name Marcus, the contrast did all the work. The news hit like a dropped anvil. Overnight, my former company's stock price plunged. Analysts were tearing them apart on financial channels, questioning leadership's competence, speculating about internal oversights and catastrophic contract mismanagement. On social media, industry insiders were sharing the press release like it was a sports highlight reel. And inside the company, my sources told me the board meetings turned into interrogations. Directors who'd been silent for years were suddenly demanding to know how an $80 million a year product line had walked out the door for a single dollar. They weren't buying Marcus's excuses. Worse, some of them had been around long enough to remember my acquisition. They knew this clause had been there all along. By the end of the week, Marcus wasn't swaggering through the halls anymore. He was holed up in his office, doors closed, calls taken on speakerphone with the blinds drawn. His allies were slipping away, voices lowered, meetings happening without him. The same way he'd isolated me before firing me, the board was now doing to him, only faster, sharper, with none of the fake politeness. I read every headline with the same calm satisfaction you feel when a machine you built runs exactly as designed. This was never about petty revenge. It was about balance, making sure arrogance and ignorance came with a price tag. Marcus had set this in motion. I just made sure the final impact left a crater. It took less than a month for the board to make their move. On a gray Monday morning, Marcus Sloane's resignation to pursue other opportunities hit the wires. No farewell tour, no teary town hall, no victory lap, just a sterile press release, the corporate equivalent of shoving someone out the side door. By then, the damage was irreversible. Contracts tied to my former product line had either been frozen or canceled outright. Revenue forecasts tanked. Vendors were demanding renegotiations. And when the competitor's marketing blitz hit full stride, customers started migrating in waves. Layoffs began within a week of Marcus's exit. First a few dozen redundancies in admin, then entire product teams gutted to cut costs. By the time the second round hit, hundreds were gone. My phone buzzed constantly with quiet messages from former colleagues, some bitter, some relieved, some just stunned at how fast the ground had vanished under them. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post smug status updates or leak inside stories. My only public statement was a short, carefully worded press release. I am pleased to confirm that I have assumed full control of the product line intellectual property. I look forward to continuing its development and ensuring it thrives under new stewardship. No gloating, no mention of Marcus, no hint of how personal this had been. But in the privacy of my own mind, the scene replayed, him leaning forward in that cramped conference room, voice lowered to a whisper, "Your ideas and the 80 million in revenue they generated are ours now." I'd carried those words with me from the moment I walked out under the escort of security. They had fueled every deliberate step, every quiet delay, every signature on every page that brought me to this moment. And now, with Marcus gone, the company bleeding, and my product in my hands, those same words had lost all their teeth. Because the truth he never saw coming, was that they had never been his. Not for a single day. That's the kind of burn that doesn't fade with time. It doesn't need to be shouted. It just exists like a silent brand that everyone in that boardroom will remember every time they see my name on the patents. I didn't need to say it out loud. The checkmate was already on the board. And the only move left for them was to sit there, in the silence, and see it. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.